All right, we're good to go. Let me just do the backup recording. All right, Tim and Shar, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. 1 second as I share my screen. All right. Welcome, everyone, to the November 14th meeting of the Identity Special Interest Group. Today, we have two things on the agenda, which is to quickly go through some working group updates from around the community, and then we have a presentation from Kim Hamilton Duffy. So thank you for joining us today, Kim.
Thank you.
Before we start, are there any announcements to cover? All right. Well, if anything comes up, please let us know in the chat, but we will move on to working group reports and goings on around the community. So the Aries working group at the Open Wallet Foundation, sorry, I'm not sure if that's still the exact name, but the Aries working group, what used to be the Aries working group, met on the 23rd, it looks like. Was anyone able to attend this call that could give us a quick summary?
So I wasn't at that meeting, but the Aries Working Group has become the Wallet Interoperability SIG. And we've had two meetings now, this week and last week. This SIG will focus on defining and publishing and testing wallet interoperability profiles. So yeah, super exciting. We meet on an alternating schedule, just for anybody who would like to attend. One meeting every other week is at this time slot. Every other week, it's the time slot before that. And so we met yesterday and had a great presentation on the FIDES effort, a Plugfest in Netherlands, and an interop test bed. So yeah, super excited about the new SIG.
Awesome. Thank you, Shar. Looks like Bifold hasn't met in a while. The Cloud Agent Python group had a meeting just a couple days ago. Was anyone able to attend the Aries Cloud Agent Python user group?
Yes, it was mainly focused on DID registration, so making it easier to add and use a range of DID methods. And then, yeah, transition to OWF is mostly complete. There are a few final updates getting wrapped up there, and then just going over PRs.
All right, sounds good. Moving on, looks like the non-creds working group met a few days ago. Was anyone able to attend this session? All right, looks like they were discussing the revocation scheme design and a couple other things. As always, if you're interested in learning more, these links do go to their working group calendars and you can see all their notes and join the next call. Hyperledger Indie Contributors Working Group met on the 5th. Was anyone able to attend this session?
Yes, we discussed the Indie quarterly report, got some good updates on the TW and the Indie Besu work. For the next meeting, this upcoming Tuesday, we will have a presentation from the mentee who completed the Indie Read Replica project through the Hyperledger mentorship program. So looking forward to that.
Nice. Sounds very cool. All right, moving on. Looks like TOIP had a meeting on the 16th. Was anyone able to attend the TOIP session? All right, looks like they were looking at some steering committee elections. November 3rd is the last time the working group.
Yeah, sorry. On that, the transition to decentralized trust is forcing a shift in those steering committee membership. It used to be based on your level of contribution financially, and now it's going to be elected from task groups and things like that. So that's what the discussion was about, that Judith was spearheading. So they're taking, or we're taking, Trust and Right Peace taking nominations from the different task force groups, and working groups to formulate that steering committee.
Okay, good to know. Thank you,
Sure.
Daniel.
Yep.
Appreciate it. All right, we'll move on. Looks like these haven't met in a while. The DIDCOM working spec group met, looks like a little while ago. But the users group has met just recently here in November 11th. Anyone able to attend that session that could give us a quick summary? All right. Well, it looks like they were discussing a hackathon and an upcoming interopathon. So look out for those from the DIDCOM users group. Trust Did Web working group met on the 7th. Was anyone able to attend this session? All right. Looks like they were working on registering some things and an update from IIW. Interoperability group hasn't met in a while. IoT. Okay, they haven't met in a while. All right. Any other Sean, I see you've raised your hand. What do you have to
Yeah.
let us?
I'm going to update the Open Wallet Foundation bullets there and make it a point to keep that up to date. And I apologize to all. We do have a little bit of news at Open Wallet Foundation. We've launched a new newsletter. Octopi, Ascar, Didcom, and the OWL test harness have all been moved over. I'm working with the Aries maintainers on the remaining repos in Aries. The Aries VCX community has not made a proposal to move to OWF, and we want to support whatever they want to do. So I'm reaching out to that community as well. We are combining the wallets and agents overview SIG with the credential format SIG. So if you have a wallet or if you have a credential format, we've got a place for you to share it. Please share. There are one or two other things I'm forgetting, which I will put in there along with meeting notes. Lastly, Identist. The Identist team had a workshop yesterday, really well received. They did a great job, about an hour and a half, taking on a high-level overview with some hands-on for the Identist community. I'm going to post that in the IDSig channel on Discord. And I'm also going to invite that team to this meeting. I would love to see them here. We want to build more bridges between the projects. They just may not have known about it, but I'm gonna talk to the dentist maintainers and get some representation, get them to include some bullets here on the wrap up. So I'm taking action items on those. Thanks, Tim.
All right. No, thank you, Sean. Awesome. Any last news or announcements from any
Yeah.
working groups?
Yeah, so you went by the under Trust over IP, the Trust Spanning Protocol Task Force met I guess it was yesterday, the 13th. Oh, maybe you don't even have it on here under, yeah, Trust over IP. There's the Trust Spanning. Oh, so yeah, under Technology Stack, you have Trust Registry. Do you have, yeah, there it is, Trust Spanning Protocol Task Force. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting and worth mentioning here. So Sam Smith provided an update. There's kind of three trust registry entities out there. There's DUNS, like, do you have a DUNS number? GS1, who does things like universal product codes and things like that, barcodes, and now VLEI is one of them that comes from Trust over IP that has its cryptographic trail all intact. So and that VLEI is one of those three now used and that uses DidWebS, which is coming out of Trust over IP as well. So just the fact that it's one of those three public trust registries, if you will, global trust registries, where it's being used in one of those three, I thought was very interesting.
No, that is a
And
great call out. Thank you.
yeah, and Drummond was taking good notes. There's all sorts of notes within the meeting notes from yesterday's Trust Spanning Protocol Task Force. Yep.
All right. Thank you. I will get that updated.
Cool.
All right. Well, unless there's anything else, now's your chance. All right. Let me find. I've lost my. There we go. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you. And yeah, this is a great group here. So I've actually never been, and I'm learning now this is a good way to figure out what's going on in the community. So I expect to drop in more. I'm going to share my screen, and I guess sorry, not sorry in advance. I'm going to be a little spicier than usual. So I'll just dive in. Okay, the title of this, putting DIDs back into centralized identity, how DIF, trust over IP, W3C, and INATBA are supercharging DID method standardization. I'm Kim Duffy, Executive Director of DIF, and I actually know all of you, at least on this call, from a long time. So I'm going to set the expectation that people are pretty familiar with decentralized identifiers, but I know you're live streaming it, so I'll add a little more context where needed. Okay, why DID method standardization? Why does this matter? Digital identity systems are rolling out broadly. So we see that in the EU DI wallet architecture reference framework, the ISO mobile driver's license standard that's being adopted. But so this is a very opinionated way to say it. Many standards referenced in those systems are not up to the task. And I don't mean that they're flawed on their own. I just mean that they may not be ready for the rollouts that they're going to face. So why is that? In many cases, there may be an option for phone home to issuer for verification. And even if not, there may be a strong dependency on the issuer. So when I say that, I talk about the idea of when the verifiable credential is issued to you, the subject or holder, how do you prove it's about yourself? And so one of the methods that's used both in mobile driver's license and STJOT is with a batch of keys that you control that are single use to avoid correlation. But then there is a dependency on the issuer because you have to get this batch of single use credentials from the issuer that are one-time use. And in some of the actual rollouts, it's mentioned that many implementers find that challenging to deal with all the keys that the subject is expected to manage. So it ends up effectively being a single request each time to the issuer to get a credential that they then use. So this is, even though some of these digital identity standards are said to be inspired by decentralized identity, there's all of these dependencies on the issuer that mean that it's not really your credential, and actually linkability is possible from the uses of it. So we'll get into some more details of that. Okay, so this is my scare tactic. I don't use my driver's license to browse the web, and I don't plan to. So we're seeing more and more use cases, whether through personhood credentials, things like that, where people are saying, well, we have this mobile driver's license thing rolling out. Let's just use that. And that's a bad idea. And we'll talk about why. Okay, so when you use driver's licenses today, it's generally in person or one-to-one interactions. So it could be face to face, but you have an expectation and pretty much a strong assurance that no one is spying on you. Certainly not data brokers popping out of the blue or other service providers correlating your activity. Further, if you are using it, it would be in a high assurance use case, say like if you're doing it online, where say you're applying for a financial service, and these are actually regulated areas. So, you know, it's not sort of just uploading your mobile driver's license to any random service provider to prove you're not a bot. But the general idea is that when you use your physical driver's license today, there's strong privacy expectations and mandates. And you control it. You don't go have to, maybe you renew it every few years or something like that, but there's not this idea that you're going back to the issuer every time, every couple of weeks or days even to get it. So fortunately, there's a growing awareness, and I've included some references on the privacy and human rights risks. I'm sort of covering broad areas of threats compared to DIDs. So there's a combination of accessibility. So the EFF wrote a great article about how, if we're suddenly requiring digital ID for everybody, especially if they're anchored on mobile driver's license, think about the huge swaths of people that we're leaving out. So, there are many considerations that are even outside the scope of technical standards. But what is of concern to us is if we are going to roll out these standards and we need to work in parallel with those kind of efforts around inclusivity, making sure we're not excluding large swaths of the population. But we do want to make sure we have strong baseline standards that are ready for broad rollout. And there's increasing awareness, fortunately, from the cryptographer camps, the people who know much better how to implement this than the rest of us. But one sort of huge accomplishment was in response to the EU Digital Identity Wallet architecture reference framework. A group of cryptographers worked together to describe specific threats of linkability in the EU Digital Identity Wallet architecture reference framework. So saying that even though the regulation asks or requires unlinkability, they further define unlinkability and what it means and say the architecture reference framework, the standards that are used do not provide unlinkability with respect to relying parties and IDPs, in fact. And then they propose better solutions. So there's unlinkability, and then there's also the agency part of it. So these are, again, huge territories of problems. But one thing that's been really interesting is that in all of these frameworks, there's this assumption that the holder or subject is, what's the right term, kind of taking a very subservient role, very dependent on the issuer for generation of identities or validation of those identities that get used in the credential, but then the lifespan is really short and your ability to use across contexts is very limited. So enter SSI, remember us? We're not dead yet. So the path to self-sovereign identity describes the principles of SSI, and part of the classical decentralized identity framework in architecture reference framework includes decentralized identifiers. So there's a huge amount of decentralized identifiers, probably too many right now. They generally look like this. So there's DID, it's a URI or string, it starts with DID. And in this example part right here is the method. And then at the end part is an identifier. But the idea is that these are strings that you can cryptographically prove control over. And there are other enhancements to, bind to these blindly so that issuers, relying parties, don't even know the full details behind it. And so you can use them across contexts with correlation, without correlation. So there's a lot of DID methods widely used in different contexts now. So the Department of Homeland Security in the US and EBSI in the EU uses DID web, for example, for issuers. So that one's bound to website did documents, did strings bound to websites. But then there are single-use generative kinds of did methods like did key, did PKH, but then there's more fully self-sovereign ones like did DHT. And so, but how do people navigate that? And a common question that we get when people are looking to start in DIDs or build a platform around DIDs is, which one do I use? How do I navigate this? There are efforts such as the DID rubric that exists in the DID standardization work at W3C, but there's a role for something clearer in terms of implementers and people learning how to navigate it. The ability to reference DIDs as a mature standard in efforts like the architecture reference framework. And we also think that maturing DID method standards themselves. So by that, I mean not the DID specification work happening at W3C, that's underway, but to be considered mature and referenceable, you would say that all of these DID methods, you need to have standardization at a much lower level. And so that includes, like, say, DID web, DID PKH, all of these ones that you might use. And what we're doing as part of this group, and let me go to the next slide. So what we're doing as part of the group is not saying there is an allow list of DID methods that are better than others. We're trying to standardize the methods that we are seeing adoption for, strong interest and promise. And actually, those exact criteria are up to the group, but I'll provide a little more context on how that works. So seeing all this happening and realizing that DIDs are an incredibly important piece to these decentralized identity architectures that, could help some of these problems that are happening. We, meaning the groups that I showed in the beginning of the slides, I'll show those here, DIF, ANATPA, W3C, Trust Over IP Foundation, work together to say, release this standardization letter of intent that got over 100 signatories of organizations. And what we did was say that we think that DIDs are important, and we understand that, okay, yes, some of the pushback against DIDs results from FUD, but some of it is something that we can actually do something about. We can actually mature DID method standards, make the landscape easier to navigate. So that's the topic of what we did in this article or this paper. And then subsequently, I think there was a lot of maybe perception that, it was difficult to navigate the language, being precise enough so that people understood what we're doing, while making sure that it's clear. Our goal is not to establish a single standardization group for DID methods. We want to support this more broadly, but we also want to accelerate standardization of methods that we think are very close to being used at broad scale, and in fact already are, but could benefit from further standardization. So we identified 3 work streams, and the DID method working group started yesterday, actually. We're having our ongoing meetings, and the next slides will look a bit more on, sort of the work that's going and how it will pan out. There will be a DID method working group that is starting at W3C to most likely mature some subset of the DID methods that this group is starting on. And then other working groups could be at other standards organizations. Then we also started a repo for broader community engagement, basically just to help people navigating. Right now, the main work is happening in this working group, but say over time, as DID method standardization starts happening at other organizations, this would be a single launch point for people to discover where it's happening. So here is the sort of rough structure of how it's going to work. And then it's also the case that the working group can revise exactly how this works. So it's a good time to get involved. So the mission is to accelerate standardization of DID methods collaboratively with key organizations, frankly, any organization interested in getting involved. The key activities are to develop categories and criteria for selection of some DID methods that we want to push over the line because we think that it's really important to unblock further process. So, sorry, this is a typo. So first it's developing the categories and criteria. Then the group will identify and select some set of methods. So just for reference, the current, in the original letter of intent, in the way we've been thinking about it so far, is that we'll pick indicative or, mature, promising ones from each of these categories. Web-based, so that would be like DID web that organizations typically use because they're familiar with what's involved with securing their web domain. Ephemeral, and by that I mean ones where there's no persistent DID documents, so that might be like DID key or DID PKH. Those are ones that we see often rolling out in pilots or implementations that focus on individuals, mostly because of lack of alternatives that are offer more longevity. But then on that side, that's where the decentralized methods like DID DHT or ones anchored on blockchains can be used. And a big part that I should probably make explicit is that there is a huge undercurrent in many of these identity efforts I referred to of backlash against blockchain. And thank you, Sam Bankman-Fried, et cetera, for all of the many years of setback there. I think that we're going to be facing some improvements, possibly through combination of improvements in ZKPs, where we can use the benefits of blockchain while keeping privacy guarantees and stay in compliance with regulatory frameworks like GDPR. So after selecting the methods, then the group will further develop DID method specifications to take them to maturity. Then in parallel with that, so again, like at this point, we've been focusing primarily on specific DID methods, but we also want to develop techniques to support broader standardization efforts. More in the next slide on that. Then as these DID method specifications become mature, say for the web-based method, it might be critical for the DID method specification for, say, DID web, DID TDW, whatever one that is, or some combination of those two, to go live at W3C DID working group. One like, say, if it's DID EBSI or something based on the DID blockchain, if that's happening through this work, then that might go live at a standards org in the EU. So there's all of these considerations. The goal of this DIF group is to incubate. Some of them may continue to live at DIF, but many of them will probably be donated to other standards bodies. So here's a slightly different view of how that would work. You can think about this first work stream as kind of, linear, except for the fact that DID method standardization may not occur in lockstep. So first, there will be a lot of discussion about developing the criteria and categories. The first item that the working group is focused on is to develop some, so we're seeing this grouping as the straw man, but people are submitting GitHub issues to propose other ways of, what is it, skinning the cat? I'm bad with my sayings, but so we're considering other alternatives. But then the working group will focus on coming to consensus with that very soon. Then choosing candidate DID methods based on this. So hopefully, it's going to be very important for this group to keep coming back to the idea of, we're not creating this allow list. We're creating something where, we think that this might have huge potential for rollout, and it may end up being influenced by factors that the group decides on that we're not thinking about right now. Just one interesting tidbit to throw out. I wish I had included them here, but Manu had some metrics on rollout of DID methods, and there's shockingly many DIDs in use right now. And then I think Blue Sky is skyrocketing to number one, especially lately. Maybe something like 15 million DIDs deployed. They use the DID placeholder method because none of the methods that were used currently were good enough for them. That we're lucky that they're actually participating in the group, it appears. So we'll learn more about why the current ones didn't work and then how to improve that. So I think it's really exciting because we've managed to hit a broader community through saying, we really want to help you, meet you where you are, whichever organization you're in, and help you learn how to progress it. So just a quick side note on that. So then we'll be progressing with specifications. And again, this may not happen in lockstep. And it may be that the group starts breaking into subgroups because some people are more interested in one method than the other. And then as we advance to maturity, we can contribute the specification to relevant SDOs, and that's generally a function of the method itself and where the momentum is. So did web, did TDW, that certainly will make sense in W3C, for example. Then in parallel, there's the work on scalable standardization approaches. So to touch on how we think that will go down, what we want to do, we're keeping the language of it light because the scope of this working group is already enormous. But what we want to do is make sure we don't lose track of the idea that we want to support broader standardization and standardization in any standards group. So this group will consider, how do you support DID method standardization where people live? Like, say, just some organization like INATBA, who maybe we don't think of as traditionally involved in identity standards, but they are the appropriate organization for doing some standards work for a method of interest to them. The way that we're thinking about carving it is anchoring on the DID traits work. So DID traits is something to say, does it support rotation? Does it support history? Things like that. And DID traits ends up being kind of tied to the DID rubric effort that is being further developed in the DID working group. Sorry, there's so many groups that sound vaguely similar. I feel like I should have pictures for each. But yeah, so the rubric is happening in the DID working group happening at W3C. So yeah, you could see that we would say, as opposed to saying to standardize DID TDW, DID TDW is standardized this way, and here's how you test conformance, things like that. Some of those aspects may end up being cross-cutting to different categories of DID methods. So that's what this group is really about. Then next is, this is a sort of, to be defined further, but develop tooling and test harnesses in support of the scalable standardization approaches. So the outcome for this working group is creating the recommendations. They may go further and develop some sort of community note or document, and develop maybe even some useful test tools to support that. But we kept that at recommendations just because we have so much going on already. Expected outcomes include mature specifications, working group approved for the initial set of selected DID methods, coordinating with other SDOs, and that could include the W3C DID methods working group, the new one that would take on things like DID web, and other organizations to be determined that are appropriate for the DID methods. Create test suites, conformance criteria, create recommendations to enable broader standardization efforts across any organization. And then the last part is that we want to enable increased adoption of DIDs across various sectors and use cases. Just some quick information on that. To participate, we have a member sharing agreement where it's really easy to get involved. We have the details lined out. Basically, you need to sign a contributor agreement for IP purposes, so we can protect the integrity of the spec. And then DIF has a code of conduct that, it's just like any standards org for the most part. We use W3C. DIF uses W3C mode, so that works well for using the W3C license. Also very common in a lot of Linux Foundation identity works. And we have regular meetings to push forward progress, but then also a lot of it can be done asynchronously. And we'll be thinking about ways to carve up the efforts of the group to make it more sustainable. We use consensus-based approach for key decisions and moving specifications through to final approval. And I'll include a link to this deck. So I have some links here for you to get involved. We also have a how to participate matrix, so you can see these are all the if you're coming in through the member sharing agreements, so say you're not already a diff member or any of these members, but you want your org to participate and you're trying to figure out what organization makes the most sense for your organization or company, then this is sort of the list of how to get involved. So I'll leave it at that. Any questions, comments? I'll check in on the chat.
This was awesome. Thank you so much. I definitely have questions, but feel free to answer the ones in the chat first if you'd like.
So I see the one about anon creds. That I think that I see that paper, the cryptographer feedback paper. There's split it into two efforts. The first one, which is drawing the attention to the concerns about linkability, is very key. And I know for sure that there are follow-up efforts in, some of those diff are involved in through the BBS Plus side. Whether it's branded I don't know if you mean like a specific anon creds effort. I think that, there's a pretty, far developed group that actually is happening in LFDT around anon creds specifically. There's some discussion about whether that specific work will be involved, but either way, we are all very interested in working together. I think what is, sort of likely to happen, it does seem likely that BBS Plus will be involved. It does seem very likely that W3C verifiable credentials will play a strong role. We're seeing a lot of government players that, so in the EU architecture reference framework, it kind of avoided W3C verifiable credentials, especially the linked data side of it, but we're seeing a lot of examples where linked data is absolutely critical. So I think we're going to see more of that coming back. And it will certainly be very influenced by anon creds, if not, using it in some way. If you're interested in being involved in that, let me know. I don't know exactly where the work is happening that I'm on, or, I don't think it is happening anywhere else. It's very emergent right now. So we're still figuring out sort of who are the people who want to work on it, where can we best get the cryptographer activity, because we need a lot. The main thing that we're missing a lot of times is just a more detailed review, and then getting the right combination of groups. I think it's going to end up being a lot like this effort where we need to establish some kind of cross-cutting participation, because we'll need W3C. We'll need the people from DIF working on the BBS Plus standardization. This group seems like it would be a great group to be involved. So yeah, just a lot of thoughts on that, but reach out to me if you're interested in that. Where's the separation of public versus private DIDs? So yeah, that's another nuance to this that is getting, I would say, sorry, I lost control of my screen. Let me go back to the groups. You could think of it as a public being associated generally with web-based. So this one, web-based, tends to be tied for organizations which tends to be public use cases. Then the others, ephemeral versus decentralized, we're thinking of those for individuals. EBSI makes it very explicit. In fact, they say, here there's a I think it's did web or did EBSI for organizations, and those are public. And then they say did key, I think, or, specifically the ephemeral one for individuals. And I think that's mostly, people trying to stay in compliance with things like GDPR, keeping, any correlatable data off chain. We're very keen as part of this effort. When many of us got interested in decentralized identity or self-sovereign identity back many years ago, if the end state were just DIDs based on the web and generative or ephemeral DIDs, like we probably would have said, no, never mind, this is not the end state that I want. So it's very important to us to keep the effort going on decentralized, self-sovereign ones that individuals can use. Did DHT, which was developed as part of the TBD project, is probably the most mature one right now. And so that one is likely to be, a strong candidate there. But that's not saying we'll not consider other methods. It's really up to the group now. I think I got all of them in here, but one thing I want to do real fast is make sure I share the link to these slides. Oh, Keith, you have your hand raised. Hi, Keith.
Hey, Kim. This is amazing stuff. I guess when I think about this, and I'm curious what your own personal perfect world version of DIDs are. My perfect world vision of DIDs is that there is a more normative, today we have 200 and something DID methods, and a lot of them look very similar, but there's key differences between them because the spec itself is very non-normative. There's lots of optionals, that kind of stuff. I guess in a perfect world, my perfect world, it's that there's a normative DID method that people can or cannot align to, but they can choose to align to, which has a lot of musts and, you must use a public key multi-base, you must use this. But then there can be a multiplicity of ways to store or to resolve that DID. So, on different chains, off chain, stuff like that. But you always know what payload you're going to be getting no matter where you're resolving from. And so you can use that DID. That's my perfect world is, it's something like, universal resolver, multiplicity of ways to resolve a DID, but the payload you get is always known and expected. And you can always handle the payload you get to resolve whatever credential you might have received from person from wherever. Is that your perfect? That's my perfect world. What's your perfect world?
I think that's maybe a little more restricted than my perfect world, but what's interesting, we did a presentation similar to this at IAW, and I was actually trying to pull up the DID method registry just for context because, it's gotten even a little, every time we look, it's just more over the top. Actually, I will pull up did directory just for reference. So just this might be a good anchor for it. So this is a small, tiny subset of the did methods that we're dealing with. And, it grows by the day. There's a lot of concerns about it. Like, are people method squatting? Are they keeping it up to date? How do I navigate this? And there were quite a few people at the IW session that even said things like, we should be very, start cutting did methods. We should, be much more prescriptive in how people navigate it. And I think the main thing is, I get that, yes, it would be good to have a notion of how mature they are, and when you would use it for what context. For me, I think that I would like it to be anchored in the did trait, something like the did traits work, or something talking about the characteristics of it and what are the appropriate use cases for it. I could definitely see that there would end up being at minimum by convention, and it seems like 3 or 4 that could be not necessarily things that we say you must implement those, but it may just be common practice through, like DHS's work. They end up saying like use did web and use this and that, just like EBSI does. So it may end up being that people align on certain ones across these categories. That makes sense. I do think that it's also not in the spirit of the, of decentralization that we kind of lock that down too early. I think that's one reason why I'm really keen on traits combined with cross-cutting test suites, so that it's easier to say, like, these are the properties that I want to guarantee. And, but I think to your point about, a spec with lots of optional where you're not really, I think that we benefit from a lot more specificity, and whether that ends up being a byproduct of this work. So, for example, I could see that the cross-cutting efforts end up establishing profiles saying, like, these are exactly the fields you might expect in a did document corresponding to this, category, trait, whatever. So I realize I'm being too abstract about it because, so much of that work is kind of happening right now. But I definitely agree with your point. I think it's a little premature to say, it might be, it would be like down to, and maybe I'm sort of taking you too literally, like one, I do see a need for a sort of.
That's not. I'm suggesting a world where there can be a ton of different did methods. It's just they all align. They can choose to or not choose to align to a normative standard. But if they choose to, because I put myself in the shoes of a relying party, if somebody asks me to support a new did method, and if I know that new did method, whatever it is, aligns to a payload standard, and all I have to do is like maybe add support for the Docker containers to resolve it, that's not, that's less work. But if you're asking me to support a new did method and it has a different payload, different keys, everything, that's a lot of work to support. So again, individual did methods can do whatever they want, but if there was a normative standard, it would make it very easy for, I think it would make easier for relying parties to support a multiplicity of different did methods.
Yeah, it really feels like we need did document or did profiles. That's sort of feeling like the category or the direction that we take. And that would be very opinionated realizations of the did document, vagueness. And I feel like it could be aligned with this effort. I think the thing is, like, yes, if you knew that a did method resulted in this exact did document schema, that would be a huge win. There is also the aspect of, there are probably other properties of the did method that they'd want to guarantee, security wise, this and that. But I feel like maybe a couple of years from now, we're dealing with some kind of certification framework. I don't know. I don't want to, I hate that we keep tending towards these centralized things, but something where maybe there's some way to establish trust in it. And so, yeah, that's the only other consideration. Did document profiles are sort of more opinionated, shapes of did documents would definitely be useful, and I could see coming out of this. Long answer to say, yes, you have a good point.
I was wondering, so which are some of the top candidates of did methods you think will initially get selected for standardization?
Yeah, let me move to this slide. In web-based, we're seeing a lot of interest around trusted web, but then also unifying that with did web. And then there's discussion about did WebS and how that fits in. So I think that's going to be a very, it's going to trend in that area for web-based. Did web is very widely used. Trusted web adds a lot of other properties, so it's getting a lot of attention. DHS, which currently refers to did web, is more interested in unifying those. The authors of both specs have indicated that. Ephemeral, people have talked about did key a lot. I don't know. I feel like everyone sort of thinks of, to be honest, a lot of people think of these two as like, yeah, we hate that we need them and we hate that they're the most popular ones, but so let's just get something that works. So ephemeral, I would say there tends to be even less, there's fewer strong advocates on the ephemeral side. I think just through convention and practice, did key is what people refer to. If you have one that you really care about, this would be a good place to advocate for it. On the centralized methods side, the one that we've gotten the most interest in terms of maturity is did DHT. So yeah, now again, we may end up introducing other categories. None of these are actually blockchain based, which is kind of interesting. And that's something that we would be interested in, say, like whether it's coming in through some of the Web3 efforts or like European side, the EBSI method, that could be something of interest too.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, you mentioned too that there might be ZKP improvements that would impact the perception around blockchain. Do you think that would change what those top candidates are?
Absolutely. We're working with Ethereum Foundation privacy and scaling explorations very actively now. It was, I'm really glad for the clarity of things like GDPR and saying, we want to avoid even correlating people's identity, but then it just seems like that combined with the blockchain FUD of late has just moved the pendulum way in the opposite direction. And so there's been, in my mind, very little effort among our sort of traditional identity groups to figure out how to navigate that. We're getting more help from Ethereum Foundation and, people with more expertise in ZKPs. They're very, cutting edge ZKPs to figure out what's a feasible solution that might involve decentralized identifiers, but give you those sort of guarantees that the data protection frameworks are getting at.
Right. Thank you.
The question about will they give up their own method for another's? I don't know if it's just like the people are very nice about it, but say, for example, with did TDW, did web, it's almost like they're bending over backwards to say, oh, you can have what you want. You can have, so it's just, people are more interested in pushing forward the work so far versus, domain squatting or land grabbing, something like that. So there does seem to be, the authors of did web are saying, we like what did TDW has done. The authors of did TDW have said, we think that did web is a pretty good name. So that one is just kind of naturally working out. There's no one fight. If we choose this structure, there's no one fighting over ephemeral for now. Decentralized, we've actually not seen a lot of that either. So it's kind of odd, just given how you would expect these things to go. Again, I think we just have to make it very clear too that we're not trying to create this sort of allow list, and we are trying to support the broader work. Any other questions? And thank you. These are great questions, and very glad to be in this group.
I was just wondering, so all of the different working groups that have did in the title that you mentioned, would you mind just giving us a super quick overview of those and the distinctions between them?
Yes. Yes, that I don't have that here now that you mention it. But I think, let me pull that up actually. Okay, already that has been ongoing for several years is the W3C, the centralized identifier working group, and they work on standardization of DIDs themselves, not DID methods. And so they've been rechartered, and their scope is, I forget exactly, but part of what they're doing is refocusing on the DID rubric a bit. The diff did method working group is the one happening at diff. And this is the sort of, we're trying to get all this stuff off the ground. Then we see, N different did method working groups or whatever those end up being called at other organizations. Actually, let me indent this one a little bit. So, we could see the did web, did TDW, whatever, being further matured at W3C. And then other working groups, whether those are like EDC or other European focused standards orgs, other, anything basically. There's just this repo that, I don't know how much this will take off, but there was interest in having a entry point that was not specific to any of the orgs so that people could be guaranteed neutrality and stuff. So we are, for now at least, saying people can subscribe there to get updates and learn about new efforts. This is where most of the work is happening now, at least until this one gets started up in earnest. And then, they would really take on the point when, say, the specific did web method gets very mature if people want to go participate in that.
Right. Cool. Thank you for that walkthrough.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for giving me the time.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. This was a great presentation and discussion.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We will see you hopefully at our next meeting. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you so much.